Chapter 3. Return to Hogwarts. Standing at the top of the rickety old staircase, Sirius watched his godson with a deep frown. He was worried about the young boy. Something was off about the child and he didn't like it. Since he had been brought to Sirius' ancestral home, he had noticed some startling differences in the young boy. Harry, he knew, was generally a quiet boy, but this new cold aloofness was a little extreme. Dumbledore has assured him that he probably was still grieving over the death of the young boy at the True Wizard tournament only a few months ago. While that was plausible, that didn't explain the other differences he was noticing about the boy. Most of them were more physical, small and harder to detect if you weren't like Remus and himself. About 3 days ago, Harry's scent had begun to change. Remus had noticed it first, and it had taken Sirius changing into his animagus form to pick up on it. Harry's scent now had a very strong acidic tone to it, almost chemical in nature. It had been light at first, but every day it got steadily stronger. Harry wasn't the only one with that new acidic scent. 3 of the Weasley children also had that scent to them. Another sign was the almost inhuman hearing Harry had exhibited yesterday. Molly and Arthur had been talking several rooms away from where the children were working on their last little bit of summer work. Sirius had been sitting with them trying to help Ron on his transfiguration homework when Harry had raised his head, instantly looking in the direction the other adults were frowning. Don't they know it's rude to speak about someone behind their back? After asking what Harry meant, he had mimicked word for word what Molly and Arthur had said several rooms away. Even in his animagus form, Sirius wouldn't have been able to hear that conversation that far away. That seemed to be the only time though, as Sirius had tested it a few hours later and Harry hadn't moved from where he was sitting reading. The biggest change had shown itself only a few hours ago. Bored Harry and Ron had set up a wizard's chess game in the kitchen. Normally Ron always boasted about being able to take on anyone at wizard's chess, normally with a groaning Harry glaring at him, knowing the boy was going to wipe the wall with him. This time though, Ron lost every game. Harry had sat there every time with this almost bored look on his face, as if Ron was no challenge for him and the sputtering redhead was boring him. A dark frown crossed Sirius' face. There was one thing that seemed to be constant when these little incidents happened. Harry's eyes would seem to glow and the pupils were always long and narrow, almost as if they were starting to resemble a cat's eye. When these little spells would end, his eyes would stop glowing and the pupils would return to normal, and the normal Harry would seem to come back. Each time this happened, the normal Harry disappeared more and more, leaving them with the cold boy that was currently sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast before they headed off to King's Cross. Harry wasn't the only one that seemed to be acting strange. Molly and Arthur both noticed 3 of their children were starting to act a little off. Fred and George were the most obvious. While Sirius didn't know the Weasleys all that well, aside from the few days they had been here already, he could see the family was noticing the differences. Arthur said that the boys, as long as they had been able to speak, had acted the same way, making it almost impossible to tell the two apart. Now the 2 boys were becoming so different, Molly had no trouble telling them apart. Fred seemed to be gaining unlimited amount of energy and had taken to doing squats of all things whenever he was standing still for any length of time. When asked why he was doing squats, Fred would just get this really confused look on his face and shrug before going back to them. George, well, he was the biggest, Molly said. He had gained this almost laziness to him in everything he did, from the way he dressed to the very way he talked, and he had a tendency to say yo after almost every sentence now. If he was carrying his wand around, he almost always had it lying against his right shoulder. Ginny was the next. Hers were more subtle, mainly her sudden boost in confidence around everyone, and when she stood she always cocked her hips slightly and laid her arms across her stomach, crossing them lightly so each hand rested on the opposite elbow. She had also a slightly more bubbly personality, but if they were talking about something serious she became scary bright with being able to detect flaws or holes in the stories. But just like with Harry, they seemed to come in waves, and usually only lasted for a few seconds to the longest of 20 minutes so far. After that the children would seem to return to normal. There was one incident though that still to this day had Sirius in stitches. Snape had shown up prior to breakfast to report something to the Order and was still there when the children had awoken and come down for breakfast. The first thing Sirius had noticed was the silent long strides of Harry's gait as he walked in. Next had been the elongated pupils and brilliant glowing green eyes. Harry, ignoring everyone as he had come to doing lately, sat down and first thing he reached for was the small dish of candy. When Harry was in X mode, as it was dubbed by Remus, he had a strong affinity for anything sugar. Severus, noticing that Harry was completely ignoring everyone including the chattering Ron, he had made some smartass comment that had Sirius about to jump across the table and strangle the man. Harry had simply said Sirius' name and that caused him to freeze. Not looking up from where he had been unwrapping a sweet, Harry had uttered the few words that would change the whole day for the better. Really, Severus, I would have thought that a man of your station would no longer need to resort to insults that a child would use to gain attention from inattentive parents. It appears that I overestimated your intelligence. The look on Snape's face as Harry said that in a monotone voice had sent Sirius rolling to the ground, clutching his sides. Hearing quiet footsteps, Sirius pulled himself from his thoughts, turning slightly. Instantly he was pulling his wand, leveling it down on the man walking up the stairs towards him. The figure stopped, long spun silver hair falling along their back glinting from the light cast by the candles along the stairwell. Long arched bangs framed an almost feminine face that housed glowing green eyes with cat-slit pupils. Sirius felt his blood freeze in his veins as he looked down at the man now staring at him with confusion in those brilliant green eyes. Sirius, are you all right? The man flickered before vanishing, revealing Harry standing there, his normal eyes staring at the wand. Getting a little jumpy, aren't you? He laughed softly and moved past Sirius, patting him on the shoulder gently before heading to collect his trunk. What the hell did I just see? Leaning up against one of the many trees that dotted the forest's edge, Genesis absently flicked through the pages of his most prized possession. He knew his beloved play by heart and could recite it at a moment's notice, but even then simply reading the words brought such joy to his miserable existence. Hearing footsteps, he snapped the book shut with his normal dramatic flair, tucking it back into his jacket. "What did you find?" he asked, turning to regard the smaller man as he walked out from between the trees, Dark Nation faithfully following in his footsteps. "If there are dark creatures in these woods, they sense Gen overcells and don't come near." Black-gloved fingers easily stowed the massive fusion sword in its leather harness at his back. "Has Vincent returned yet?" Genesis shook his head, going back to looking out across the sweeping lawns at the massive castle that stood on a cliff some distance away. "Don't worry, Cloud, as Tseng always used to say. You can take the man from the Turks. You can never take the Turk from the man. He won't be seen." Cloud frowned, gloved fingers unconsciously reaching up, wrapping around the single gold band that hung off a Damascus chain against his chest. Seeing this, Genesis looked away, a small pang running through his chest. "Don't worry, Cloud. We'll find your Turk tonight and soon you'll be calling me to come rescue you from the bed." Cloud snorted and shook his head, unable to help the small smile that crossed his face. "We were that bad?" Genesis rolled his eyes dramatically, slanting Cloud a knowing gaze. "You broke your bed when he got home from a week-long mission." A bright blush turned Cloud the same color as the duster covering Genesis' body. "Shut up." Laughing softly, Genesis turned his attention to where he saw a sleek black wolf racing across the grounds, a rust-colored dog keeping perfect pace with him. "See, told you he wouldn't be caught." Once in the safety of the tree line, the wolf turned back into Vincent with a small pop. Running a gloved finger through his hair, Vincent stood up straight, his clawed hand come to rest on his hip as he regarded his two friends. "The children of the school will be arriving via train in a few hours," They will be holding a feast for when they arrive and the new students are assigned to houses. It will be difficult for us to enter even in animagus form to find those that we have not already discovered. I believe that if we concentrate after the sorting we will have an easier time getting one of our own in there. Nodding Genesis, more than likely Vincent will be their inside man. Even in animagus form the man seemed to become the very shadows. Were you able to get the cameras up? Forget I asked. Genesis held up his hand, getting the Turk death glare from the ex-Turk. How could he forget the number rule of surviving Shinra? Never insinuate a Turk didn't complete their mission. It was likely to be the last thing you ever did. They work? Cloud asked. Vincent nodded, causing Genesis to pout, seeing Cloud has basically asked the same thing and didn't get the death glare. The magic around the school made the modern cameras we have useless. I had to break out the old Shinra security cameras. I thought those died nearly 3,000 years ago. They did. The Mako battery cells ran out in them. Vincent sent Genesis a look, causing the auburn-haired ex-soldier to roll his eyes. Of course, the school was saturated in magic. Magic was the result of human pulling upon their inner life stream, harnessing the power much as they had done with materia, and the cameras were powered by Mako. Concentrated life stream. What is security like inside the castle? Vincent actually snorted, turning his back on the castle. Scarlet's security was better than this school's security. The two Genova projects snorted, shooting the dark gunman an amused look. That bad, huh? Genesis looked back to the castle, a dark smile crossing his face. Good. They will never know what hit them. It felt strange moving through the Hogwarts Express by himself. Every year since the first train ride he had Ron and Hermione behind him as he moved, looking for an empty compartment. Today it was just him, looking for some place to sit. It was amazing how hard it was when it was just yourself and you nearly missed the train. Feeling something deep in him reacting, he looked up, a small sneer crossing his face, seeing Malfoy sauntering down the small aisleway of the train compartment, prefect badge pinned to his robes. Instantly Harry looked for Crabbe and Goyle. Shockingly, neither of his hulking bodyguards could be seen anywhere around him. Instead, just a single figure followed behind him, almost like a silent wraith. Wait. Wasn't Blaise Zabini darker 3 months ago? While the arrogant Slytherin was normally very reclusive and kept to himself, Harry could have sworn he remembered the boy being several skin shades darker than he was at the current moment. His hair is longer too. And straight. Blaise's hair, which Harry had always remembered as being short cropped, was now long enough that he was wearing it in a short ponytail at the back of his head. Harry looked over the boy, seeing he moved with a very quiet grace. He got the great impression of a panther stalking through the forest. Seeing Malfoy had spotted him, he readied himself for the fight he knew was about to come. He was shocked when Blaise set a hand on Malfoy's shoulder, causing the blonde Slytherin to look back. Blaise simply shook his head, removing his hand from Malfoy's shoulder, giving him an expected look. Glaring, Malfoy nodded and moved past Harry without a single word. Blinking in shock, Harry almost didn't catch the softly spoken words from the young Slytherin following Draco. Behave yourself, Konko. Eyes instantly starting to glow, pupils slamming into slits, Harry whirled around, seeing Blaise looking back at him with a small knowing smile. Instantly Harry was hit with a vision from his dreams, a young oriental man dressed in a high-end black suit, long black hair tied back into a ponytail, following silently behind a blonde teen in all white, giving the same smile. Behave yourself, Konko. Turning back around to follow after Malfoy, Blaise smiled knowingly, black eyes glinting with a very old light in them. So it wasn't just his Turks that were back, Soldier was here as well. Not just any soldier too. The Wizardry World's golden boy was Shinra's silver demon, her star general. This was going to prove to be a very interesting year indeed. Blinking rapidly, Harry shook his head violently, trying to get his mind to start working once more. What the hell was going on around here? First he was having these weird dreams, then Fred, George and Ginny started acting weird. Now Draco and Blaise were acting strange as well. What was next? Neville was going to start spouting off about dreams and honor. Stopping short, Harry frowned. Where the hell had that thought come from? Okay, this was just getting weird. Shaking his head again, he really had to wonder if he was going insane. Walking further down the train, he stopped at a compartment. Speak of the devil. Inside the compartment was Neville, curled up by the window reading over a herbology book. Sitting across from him with massive dual-colored glasses was the ever-eccentric Luna, a copy of the Quibbler once more upside down in her hands. He was surprised though to see Dean sitting on the other side of Neville, his eyes simply staring straight ahead of him. What was even more shocking was George was sitting next to Dean, chatting up a storm with the young Gryffindor, or only nodding every here and there. Fred was currently reading over a Quidditch magazine next to Luna. As if sensing someone was looking at her, Luna looked up and smiled, waving to him. Unable to help it, Harry smiled in return and pushed the door open, moving into the very crowded compartment. "Hey guys." The whole group looked up, each wearing different varying smiles. Dean's could hardly be called a smile, just a slight tilt of the lips. "Yo Harry," George said before going back to his very fast conversation with Dean about Quidditch. "How long has he been talking?" Harry asked, sitting down next to Fred, who looked up from his magazine. "It's more like, when has he not stopped talking? He is worse than a puppy," Neville said, not looking up from his book. He suddenly blinked and looked up confused. "Why did I say that?" "No idea, you." George shrugged and lay back in his chair, kicking his feet up so they rested between Harry and Fred. Setting his book down, Neville frowned, looking at all of those sitting in the compartment. "This is strange. I have been doing this all summer, saying things I have no idea why I am. I actually gave my uncle a lecture on honor and dreams a couple days ago." "Angel? What happened?" Later I received one of his famous lectures." "About what?" "Always the same: discipline, dreams, honor, etc." "Oh, one of those." Harry could hear those words in his head. His own voice once more, slightly deeper, and another ... the same voice of the black-haired boy from his dreams. Leaning forward, Harry set his chin on steeple fingers, his green eyes roving over the figures around him. "Have any of you noticed anything strange this summer ... like acting a way we normally never would?" Every head raised in the room and turned to look at Harry, wariness building in all their eyes. "Everyone seems different this year. Well, some of us." Luna was the only one not looking up from her book, though it was hard to tell with the glasses she wore. "You are all sitting differently, which is showing something has changed in you. All be Seamus." "It's weird, you know." Went over to Dean's over summer, and one day he was his normal self and then next day He made a motion at the Dean currently sitting next to him. "He don't talk." Dean merely shrugged. Never once did he utter a word. "See what I mean?" The frustration was evident in Seamus' voice. Fred and George no longer appear to be one person split between two bodies, but two very separate people. Luna finally looked up from her book, removing her glasses. The group startled slightly, seeing exactly how sharp and focused they were. Gone was the dreamy expression she always wore. "Harry, you seem to have more regal bearing about you, powerful, confident." Harry flushed slightly at that and looked away, a small frown taking shape though as he thought of two others. Malfoy and Zabini are also different. It was almost like Blaise could control Draco with just a touch. Neville frowned, closing his book and laying it against his bag on the ground. "That's strange. Blaise never really associates with anyone. He tolerates Malfoy." "Exactly. But today when they passed by me he was following behind Malfoy almost like a mole security guard." "Who sold us all the Macaulay's drugs?" "I want more." The group all blinked and looked to George, who was now looking as confused as ever. "George, what is Macau?" Harry asked, though something about that word pulled at something in his mind. I have no idea." Sitting behind his large desk, Albus Dumbledore read over the letter once more from a concerned Molly Weasley. The owl had arrived not too long ago and expressed concerns about 3 of her brood and the way they were acting. Normally this would not concern Albus, What concerned him was that this was taking place at the exact same time Sirius had approached him about Harry exhibiting similar behavior changes. The boy had reportedly heard a voice reciting a passage from the ballad Loveless, that in itself was strange as Loveless was not a common ballad told among the wizarding world. In fact, outside certain groups its script was lost forever. Only those that studied history extensively would have come across the book containing the 4 short verses that had been uncovered in Japan several hundred years ago. Standing up, Albus moved over to his large bookshelf, pulling out his own tattered book of ancient poems and ballads. Flipping it open, he moved back towards his desk, fingers tracing over the fading writing. When the war of the beast brings about the world's end, the goddess descends from the sky. Wings of light and dark spread afar. She guides us to bliss, her gift everlasting. Albus. Looking up from his book, Albus regarded the 4 professors gathered around his desk. Moving back to his desk, he sat down gracefully, blue eyes twinkling behind his half-moon glasses. "Are you familiar with a ballad titled Loveless?" he asked, causing the 4 heads of house to shift, sending each other questioning glances. "I do not believe so, Albus." "What does this have to do with Potter?" Minerva asked, looking to the ancient headmaster. Setting the book down, Albus regarded the 4 before him through steepled fingers. Loveless was a ballad unearthed from the remains of an ancient city in Japan some 200 years ago by a young wizard, which it was then translated. While it is popular among the historians of Japan, it is not, as you can tell, well known amongst the rest of the world. It consists of 4 acts and is thus believed to be unfinished, as a 5th act was never found. The 4 head of house waited patiently, knowing this had something to do with why they were called up so close to the welcoming feast. Opening the book once more, he found the right passage and handed it to Severus before handing a separate piece of parchment to Minerva. Written on it were the exact words Harry had said that had started the Weasleys' concern. "Severus, Act 4, if you would be so kind." "Minerva." He motioned towards the note in her hands. Confused, she looked down as Severus started to read. "My friend, the fates are cruel, there are no dreams, no honor remains. The arrow has left the bow of the goddess. My soul, corrupted by vengeance, hath endured torment, to find the end of the journey in my own salvation, and your eternal slumber." Severus closed the book and set it back on the desk. "That's dark," Sprout said, looking at the book sitting on the desk. "It's also identical to what is written in Miss Granger's handwriting. But there is more." Dumbledore nodded, motioning to the letter with his hand. "Those are words that Mr. Potter recited from memory after claiming to have heard a voice while standing in the Weasleys' house. The last part he claimed was the 5th act, written by a man that had believed he was living the ballad. He states he had never even heard of the ballad before reciting it perfectly. Now this would not be worrying, as I would assume he was hiding the fact he enjoyed books." His eyes seemed to twinkle more at this, with 3 of the professors sitting in front of him smiling knowingly. "But Molly has stated he has started showing disturbing new personality traits, all of which began to manifest in early July. When Sirius approached me about the mood change, I assumed because of what he was describing that young Mr. Potter was simply grieving. But picking up the letter, he looked down to what Molly had written and Sirius had thrown in. She describes it as Harry will go through periods of complete personality change that last from only a few short seconds to 10 minutes at its longest. He becomes quiet and distant, ignoring all those around him. His attitude becomes aloof and impersonal. His speech pattern changes, becoming more fluid and using words he normally never would. He exhibits a very strong analytical mind that seems to manifest around battle and strategic tactics, as he was able to beat Ronald every time within a few moves, where a week prior Ronald would beat him every time." Dumbledore smoothed the letter out in front of him absently. "He has shown a quick wit." He sent an amused look at a very unamused Severus, showing an intelligence that outshines even Miss Granger. He looked at his foreheads, his face becoming serious. "I would assume that this has something to do with Voldemort." He ignored the flinches of the 4 professors before him. But Mr. Potter has not been the only one exhibiting flashes of complete personality difference. Molly has reported that 3 of her children have also exhibited it. Fred and George are the most obvious. During these flashes that last for up to 20 minutes, Fred is reported to lose a good portion of his attention span, become easily distracted and hyperactive. He exhibits extreme energy, so much so that he has been found performing hundreds of squats at random spots across the house. When asked, he looks confused before shrugging and returning to them. He has exhibited strange quirks, using words he would never use, walking with his arms thrown behind his head or scratching the back of his head and becoming easily excitable. The 4 professors pulled different faces, though all were thinking the same thing. A hyperactive short attention span Weasley twin. They were all in deep trouble this year. Chuckling, Albus turned back to his letters. George, during these same spells, which seem to happen alongside Fred's, now speaks in a lazy drawl, using extensive slang that no one has ever heard before, and says yo after almost every sentence. His dress has changed to the point where he dresses lazily, like he no longer cares for his appearance. He has taken to attaching a leather strap around his wand that attached around his wrist, and when he stands still he rests it against his right shoulder and bounces it. She states that while that is disturbing all in itself, he has shown a mind almost as analytical as Harry's during these spells. Very little misses his attention now, and he can spot flaws in the most perfectly laid plans before even Mrs. Granger can. Ginny has shown new traits. Though hers are not nearly as obvious, Molly says. Albus shook his head. Analytical mind, increased confidence and a stance change are all that Molly has noted. Voldemort has not made any mention of doing anything to those close to the boy. Severus said, knowing he would get a lecture from Albus if he called him you know who. I would assume Voldemort if it were those very close to Harry, but Ron and Hermione seem to be unaffected, and people that aren't around Harry are exhibiting strange behaviors as well. I received letter from Mrs. Longbottom and Mrs. Thomas about Neville and Dean. Both have also exhibited strange behaviors. Mr. Thomas not nearly as noticeable. His mother says that he will not talk unless he absolutely needs to, and has grown a strange affinity for wearing sunglasses all the time. Flitwick snickered. He couldn't help it, that was just so strange out of all the symptoms that had been described so far. I quite agree. Albus chuckled himself before turning to Mrs. Longbottom's note. Neville has shown more disturbing changes. His self-confidence has gone through the roof along with his magical power. This summer he performed an accidental elemental magic, Wandless. This caught all 4 professors' attention. It was well known Neville struggled greatly with spells with the wand. He shot a fireball through his bedroom wall on accident when he was practicing wand movements for his charms homework. It is said he has also grown a very strong sense of pride and honor, even going so far as to lecturing people on those subjects if they do something he believes is dishonorable. He sent an amused look at Severus. Honestly, he would pay to see the young boy stand up to the professor. Severus frowned, knowing what that damn twinkle in his eye was. He cursed the old man 6 ways till Sunday. Those are the only one that I have received notes on, though I have received word from other order members that Blaise Zabini's physical appearance has begun to change. No one has been able to get close enough to the boy to tell if he has also suffered personality changes. I want all of you to keep an eye on the students. Any that show signs of extreme personality changes, inform me. Nodding, the 4 stood up, recognizing a dismissal. Minerva. Stopping, Minerva moved back to the desk as the other 3 moved out of the room. Tonight, after the sorting, go through in your animagus form and walk among the students. Sirius and Remus both reported that the 4 at the house all gained an acidic scent to their normal scent. Almost like they had been dumped in a radioactive tub. Sirius had stated in the letter Molly wrote that the scent that hung on the 4 had been similar to the scent he picked up around old nuclear reactors. Of course, Albus, I'll go through once I have taken the sorting hat away. Dumbledore nodded and turned back to the book, the twinkling leaving his eyes. For the first time he didn't have an answer for what was going on, and he didn't like not knowing what was going on. Slipping into the great hall, Vincent instantly pressed himself into the deep shadows, his form seeming to meld with them even as he padded forward on pawed feet. He had his ears pinned back against his head against the noise of all these loud children talking all at once. It also helped keep the earpiece in place. He had broken out one of the old Mako-powered wireless earpieces that the Turks had used after Meteor Fall when they were far less in numbers and more spread out. Cloud and Genesis were back at the large abandoned house they had discovered away from the village, monitoring the cameras. The village seemed to believe it was haunted, which meant no one went around it. The house provided the perfect hiding spot until they were ready to make the move on Hogwarts. They would sneak into the castle and live so they could help those reincarnated to regain their memories and train for the battle ahead. Seeing the coast was clear, Vincent slipped under the first table, Slytherin from what he understood from watching the sorting through the doors. It was a very tight fit if he wanted to keep from giving himself away and getting kicked. Padding down the line of students, he kept his nose going, so far other than really bad and strong perfumes and colognes, no Mako. He was about 3/4 of the way down the table when he stopped, instantly hit by two different Mako signatures. One was very faint, only light enhancements. Rufus. The other was stronger, not nearly as strong as Genesis or Cloud's, not Soldier. Turk. Moving up to the two which were sitting next to each other, he nearly yelped in surprise when a hand shot out over his muzzle, strong fingers instantly locking it shut. Before Vincent could react, the person's index finger moved to rest over his nose where it tapped out a beat. Instantly Vincent recognized the silent communication of a Turk. "You are getting sloppy, Valentine. What would Velt say?" Shaking his head, he found the hand still had a very strong grip on his muzzle. He didn't know if he was more shocked he had been seen or that someone seemed to have regained their sense of self before Sephiroth awoke. "Meet me out by the forest after the feast. Careful, McGonagall is a cat on the prowl." The hand then lifted from his muzzle before running over his head gently and up to the ear the earpiece was. Resting against the small mic that was attached, he tapped out a beat that made Vincent smile before continuing off on his hunt. Back in the Shrieking Shack, Cloud was watching the screen, the earphones plugged into his ear. He was just starting to wonder what was taking Vincent so long to finish with the green-clad students when he heard it. A beat used only by Turks that he had learned once he had started to date their leader. Hearing the beat, he instantly felt his heart stop. Tears slipped down his cheeks unnoticed. Hearing a strange beat on Vincent's earpiece, Genesis looked over to Cloud. His own eyes widened in horror. "Cloud?" Rubbing his eyes, Cloud quickly pointed to the screen where he saw one of the green-robed boys sitting right next to the boy he pinned as Rufus lifting his hand up from under the table and returned to eating. "It's Tseng. And he's awake." Cloud looked up at him with one of the happiest smiles he has seen on the boy's face in thousands of years. That beat was Turk communication. It said, "Ranan, I'll see you soon. Love you." Unable to keep the shit-eating grin off his own face, Genesis wrapped his arms around the reclusive blonde and hugged him tightly. "I told you your Turk was too damn stubborn to stay away for long." Back at Hogwarts, Vincent had managed to make it through 2 tables of students. Other than the Turk and Rufus, no one else had the smell of Mako. He knew though that he was getting close to soldier members as he could make out the faint scent of Genova attached to the overpowering scent of Mako wafting in from the far table. The closer he got, the harder it was to discern if it was them he was smelling or another reincarnate. He was just reaching the end of the yellow table when he came nose to nose with a tabby cat with strange square markings around her eyes. "Fuck you, Tseng." He thought out desperately. He didn't realize the cat part was literal. Gasping, Cloud threw his headphones to the table and stood up, grabbing his own wand from the bedside table. This instantly had Genesis' attention. That was animagus. Vincent's going to be discovered. "Shit. Go. I'll keep watch here and radio in." Cloud nodded, knowing Genesis would stand out too much, though he wasn't much better. Running through to the small hole they had created to get in via their animagus form, a brilliant golden Fenrir burst from the house, its forepaws pounding on the ground as it ran at a dead sprint for the forest that surrounded the school. The cat in front of him instantly hackled up. Shit, of course she would realize that he was an animagus. Knowing he only had one shot, he burst out between two students' legs, racing for double doors. Seeing the doors slam shut, he skidded to a stop just shy of slamming into them. Damn it, Tseng's right, I am slipping. It had been far too long since he had to sneak through a magical world. He had been working for Mul Secret Services and the American CIA way too long. They had to make money to survive some way, and that was the best job Vincent had found so far. Turning, he found several wands pointed at him as the teachers stood up at the head table. A woman in all pink with a toad-like face looked like Christmas had just come early. An unregistered animagus, she said in a very sickly sweet voice. Vincent found himself snarling, baring his teeth at them, his hackle going up as his demons were all screaming to be released to protect themselves from these threats. Sitting up slightly at the Gryffindor table, Harry looked at the strange wolf that had been cornered by the entrance doors. Something was very familiar about the wolf, black with brilliant glowing crimson eyes. No sooner had he looked at the eyes than he saw a man in black leather and a crimson cloak. "Your real father," a voice whispered to him. Standing up, he looked over to Neville, seeing he was already standing, as was Fred. Both boys were looking back at him with brilliant glowing blue eyes. He in turn was looking back with glowing acid green. Not needing to say a single word, the three moved, Neville and Fred taking off at a dead sprint towards the door, something inhuman powering them at a speed that was keyword inhuman. They had heard the strong locking spell, knowing there was no way a simple hammer would open them. That left one option: break the doors down. "Oh yeah!" Fred shouted, reaching a certain point before the door. Both he and Neville stopped just long enough to coil their bodies down and then launch off with enough force to shatter the stone under them. Twisting in the air, the two slammed into the same door, knowing they needed to go after the same door. They hit with enough force, the thick wood splintered heavily and sheared right off its hinges, crashing to the floor with a ear-splitting bang and sliding several feet across the entrance hall. Groaning, the boys sat up, gripping shattered shoulders. This never used to hurt. Wait. Fred's eyes returned to their normal color, seeing Neville's had too. What the hell had they just done? Vincent was frozen to the spot, his crimson eyes looking to where the door had been before. Two mecha-fueled boys slammed into it with the strength of soldier first. Two hands gripped his fur and started to drag him out of the room. Ripping himself from the grip, he looked back, being met with acid green eyes. "Go, Dad." Did he seriously? Vincent was frozen to the spot. Did this kid just call him Dad? Seeing the wolf wasn't moving, Harry growled, his eyes flashing. "Go." Jerking out of his shock, Vincent turned tail and ran, instantly going for the shadows and out the front door, where he was greeted by a golden Fenrir. Breathing deeply, Harry's eyes returned to normal, though the perfect emotionless mask remained on his face as he turned, eyes meeting twinkling blue.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed the videos so far and video game content. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment down below. And I noticed 40% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you can, please subscribe to the channel. It'll help me and help the channel grow. Until next time, goodbye!